Good evening, everyone. Please find your seats or get your last chance for a snack. Thanks, everybody, for coming to tonight's public meeting for Region Central. We're really excited to be able to share with you all of the work that's been going on for the last 2 years. Just a couple of housekeeping things. The restrooms are down that hall over there. There are snacks and drinks in the back. Also, each of you should have received a comment card when you signed in. There's a box on the sign-in table where you can leave those comment cards when you're done. Also, if you want to take a further look at the things that are being presented tonight, whether you're online on the webinar, hello to those of you on the webinar, or in here, all of the presentation and the boards that we'll be showing tonight will be posted at gbnrtc.org/Region Central, and you can go there and you can leave as many comments as you want as well on that. So thank you again for joining us tonight, and I'm pleased to introduce Hal Morris from the Greater Buffalo Niagara Regional Transportation Council.
Thank you, Nancy, and so much welcome for everybody that's participated in this and coming to see what we're doing. Yeah, my name is Hal Morris with Buffalo Niagara Regional Transportation Council. For those of us that don't know who we are, we're an independent organization made up of governments and agencies in Western New York with 50 years of history, and we're charged with transportation planning in this area. How did this all start? Well, I'm manager of this project, and for over 18 months we were asked by the then governor and the State Transportation Commissioner to prepare studies and engage the public to find creative solutions for the future of the Route 198 Expressway and the area of the city that we call Region Central. At the as we experienced a very challenging year, all of us in 2022, we know that not only do we need to rebuild our infrastructure in this area, but we need to build a stronger and better future with greater urgency. We've reached out to meet with individuals, groups, stakeholders, elected officials, and others to address key issues and find some common ground, which seems a little different from the way we typically do business. I thank all of you that helped us with this project to bring it forward, and I appreciate the opportunity to meet the many hundreds who participated. So we're here to present tonight a preferred scenario, and this is a starting point though. So from here, this is where the community partners can bring new ways to work together to build that better future. I'd like to also thank others who have participated in this process, including the consultant team led by Stantec, our staff at GBNRTC, including Mike Finn, our executive director, and all our elected officials. At this point, I'd like to introduce David Dixon, and he's leader of this world-class consultant team to start this evening's presentation.
Thank you very much. Whenever anybody introduces you as world class, be very, very careful. Anyway, it is great to see you, and I'm going to build on a couple of my predecessors' comments. Nancy, thank you for being here, and we've been at this for 2 years because many of you are now look familiar to me. You've been participating with us for 2 years. And in fact, you've been working on this in some cases for the previous 18 years to get us to the point where we could have this 2-year process. And we want to say thank you for that. It's been really appreciated. It's a very excellent and terrific foundation. And then Hal used help in the past tense. He said, you've all helped by your participation. How should I say this? By the time we are done tonight, hopefully you will be all excited about staying involved and continuing to help, because how do I say this? We live in a political world, and the work that you've all done that hopefully we have really memorialized and will be adopted will be handed to folks who work for folks who get elected and pay attention to political wins, et cetera. And your activism will make sure that the promise is realized. Is that fair? So I'm sorry, I don't mean to wear you all out ahead of time, but thank you very much. And you've certainly demonstrated you're willing to do it. So my job is to sort of just set the stage for tonight. We're going to do a very quick recap of the process. You don't need to hear what you've done all over again. and really focus on recommendations. But I want to emphasize that the process has been shaped by some much larger sort of trends and changes. The first of all, and probably most important, is to understand that if we had been planning this in 1950, the way people, or 55, whatever, the way people planned transportation then, which frankly would not have included any of you, and it's nothing to do with what year you were born, we would have probably come up with the same result that they did and planned the Scajaquada, because it was not a community-based time to plan. It was a fear-based. Cities were declining. People with money and white skin were moving to suburbs. Cities were desperate and they wanted to get those people with money, and I'm sorry to be so direct here, and white skins to downtown so downtown would survive, et cetera. That's why the Scajaquada was born. And also, it wasn't until after World War II that we had universal access to cars. That was a huge change. Unfortunately, we forgot that we shouldn't let the technology shape our communities. We should shape the technology, and we let the technology shape our community. So everybody wanted to use this new technology and they wanted places to drive, and you know the story. We now live in a very different period where it is not about cars, it is about people. And that is not just a sort of a moral transition. It has to do with, let's say, if Buffalo depended on getting people from the suburbs to downtown to survive in 1950, today it depends on people wanting to live here, valuing this community, having chances to interact with each other, to walk from neighborhood to neighborhood and exchange ideas. Buffalo needs a very different kind of environment and a very different way of planning for mobility. Is this making sense to folks? And one of the things that Hal did, wherever Hal deserves a lot of credit for, I don't know if he doesn't claim it, but he's the one who came up with the idea that instead of looking at Buffalo as a region to develop the context for this planning, let's look at the area, the people impacted by the expressway, and use that as the primary focus site area for planning, and hence the invention of Region Central, which I promise none of you had heard of before Hal invented it, because it wasn't a term. And he literally said, this is the place that should make the decision, partly because you will all take the larger region's needs into account. You all share the same place, but that it is from this physical base that we should plan in the 2020s, because these are the lives that are impacted. Is this making sense? These are the people who decide I want to live here or not, which is what matters. So the process that many of you have been involved in for much longer than I have began with years to review the planning history of this place. How should I say it? Brings some frustration, because it basically, well, it ground to a halt for the right reasons. They couldn't make a decision because they didn't have the right alternative on the table yet, because they didn't have a process for getting to the right alternative. And that's not a criticism of anybody. It's because, we learn as we go. So people learned, and people like Hal developed a new process from a baseline analysis that really looked at Region Central, what its needs, aspirations were, engaging folks like you who have a terrific and very generous set of values. I want to say one of the things that we observed quickly is that there are not conflicts among you as to what the priorities should be, which is very interesting. You all tend to, and I hope I'm not overclaiming, share the same priorities for a more livable neighborhood, a more equitable Region Central in Buffalo, a place that nurtures economic opportunity as it's understood in the 21st century, when we have a knowledge economy that is what grows. You are very interested in not just reclaiming the Olmsted legacy because it's something to be proud of, but because it was grounded in a wonderful way to enjoy and celebrate nature in the midst of a city. And it's been just really inspiring to us to see the visceral desire to bring that back and have access to it and give everybody access to it. And finally, it's about effective local and regional mobility. It's about planning for mobility that works for the 21st century. I want to point out that this third point is what we're going to talk about tonight. And this is an important point to make, because in order to enhance equity, and we should have economic opportunity for all in there also, and create a more inclusive development and inclusive economy, and actually to enhance quality of life of the neighborhoods in which you live. In order to replenish parks, parkways, waterways, give people access, make these part of your life, we've got to get the third bullet right. It is the foundation. We know the values we want to work toward. It is the foundation that will allow us to do it. One of the things that Hal I know is committed to doing, and he certainly will have to be after I say it now, is to put together committees that will include, I'm sure, many of you, to make sure that if the recommendations that we bring forth tonight are in fact adopted as the direction that planning should go, the future of the Skagit Corridor, how it should be shaped, that there are committees that make sure that all the detailed planning that goes on in years to come really does enhance equity, really does enhance access to the Skagit Creek and the ability to celebrate nature in neighborhoods, because the pudding in which the proof will be found is yet to be cooked, so to speak. So on that note, thank you so much for being here. Ask us any questions. We'll be gathering in front of boards you don't see yet afterwards. And when I come back in 20 years, I hope to see you all at yet another meeting celebrating the fact this is open, maybe in 5 years. Anyway, thank you very much.
Don't worry, you'll be seeing David again before the end of the presentation. I think he's got one more slide. And my name is Ralph Danisco. I've been leading the mobility component of this plan since the beginning. How many of you were here at the, well, not here, but at Buff State at the meeting in May? All right. That's a good retention rate. That's what we'd call it in the business. So, and just to re-go over this is where we are. We're all the way at the end of this process where we're going to present to you what the recommendation of your process is, right? All of our work and interpretation of everything we've heard and everything we've seen and what that boils down to. And we've done much work in the beginning, review of all the work that's been done before, analysis, heard from all of you, translated that into goals. What do you want to see? And then developed scenarios and then tested them. And I'm going to go through that a little bit and then where we are here today. So if you were here in May, and many of you were, you may remember that we developed 4 scenarios and we asked you to comment on them. Right? Many of you also told us which ones you like, and that's fine. And we adapted those based on the feedback we heard. And those 4 scenarios represented a kind of range of outcomes. And our goal here is not a final design, it's a design approach. I'll explain that a little bit later. But those 4 scenarios ranged from something that is the status quo, a corridor that looks much the same as it does today, but better, all the way down to something that was like full removal, as if there was no road, there was no highway, there was no anything else, and it was replaced with parkland or something that looked more like what used to be there before they built the highway. And these are the exact visuals that we showed at that meeting before you all marked them up and commented on them. But it again shows those approaches to the corridor, where there would be a road, where there would be intersections, where there would be ramps, where there would be new crossings, what we might do with some of the parkland or things that would replace it. But we presented all of those again. And by the way, if nobody said it, all of these slides are also going to be available online. People can go look at them. I can spend more time with them. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time reading the details of them here. Just they're too rich for that kind of environment. Many of you commented on the specific scenarios that we were testing. You may not remember, but you also commented on these. These are the lenses, if you will, that we said. These are the things that you care about. These are the things we heard from past processes and through this process, that you wanted a Skagit corridor and a Region Central that accomplished these things, right? And we really put them into 3 buckets. The first is effective local and regional mobility. That means many, many different things. And we broke those down further. And there's an example in the green of how we translated that into metrics. So something like, how many locations are there to cross the Skagit corridor? And we evaluated each of the scenarios against that, as well as the existing. The second is replenished parks, parkways, waterways, and historic places. So how much can we recreate what was here or make it better in today's context, not an 18 whatever context? And then the third is enhanced equity and inclusive development. And again, we translated all those big picture titles into specific goals and metrics, right? And you all commented on those and we adapted them based on those meetings. We developed subcategories. Believe it or not, we developed 39 of them, total metrics for all of these. And that's the work that we've been doing since May as a team, as a full team, including the GB and RTC folks, is taking each of those scenarios, developing them to a certain level of detail so that we could evaluate them against those goals and metrics. Now, 4 scenarios, 39 metrics. If I tried to talk through all of them, we'd be here for 5 hours and you would be running me off the stage. So we're not doing that tonight. All of that will be available. But what we tried to do as a result of that was take the best parts of each of the scenarios and combine them into what we're going to show you tonight is what we think the recommended design direction is. And one thing that you can see is the at-grade scenario, which involves not eliminating a road, but replacing the expressway with something that looks more like a surface road, scores well against many of the categories here. That's not to say it scored the highest against every particular metric. We paid particular attention to those things and tried to adapt that scenario and others to include the things that work the best. So we developed from this a hybrid design that builds off of each of those. And before we do the full reveal, I want to talk a little bit about what we think that does and what we tried to capture. So the recommended through this process, what we're calling Skagway Parkway, name is up for debate, is similarly Olmsted Parkway inspired. It has at least 1 lane in each direction with a potential sometimes for a carriage road. So there might be a through road and a separate road next to it within the right of way for certain segments. Has bike paths and sidewalks throughout. That was a big part, by the way, of what we heard through the process is how much the current highway and creek actually divides neighborhoods. It actually acts as a barrier, and we proved it with a lot of data. If anybody remembers the mobility guide and some of the stuff that was put online earlier, really show how, depending on where you lived, you did not go to the other side of the expressway. People just don't. The majority of people live their lives this way or this way, not across, in ways that you don't even realize. And again, the recommended design here removes all the ramps. Even as it exists, many of those ramps we've shown you are substandard. Right? They're short. The mergers are difficult. They're safety hazards. In this, and I'll show you some examples of what this looks like. With 1 lane in each direction, all of the ramps are removed except for ones, and you'll be able to see some of the details that are kept for a specific purpose and replaced essentially with at-grade intersections. And that's what it is, what it does from a public benefit standpoint. And again, having gone through all the metrics, we think that the recommended parkway really enables restoration of parks, resources, heritage assets, not all of them, not exactly the way it was, but the potential to recapture much of that, and in some ways do it in a way that works for today's world. It creates safer, more direct and enjoyable connections, not just for people on cars, for people walking, for people bicycling, for public transportation. All of those were part of our analysis. They're part of the things you care about. They're part of the metrics. Again, we think it enhances safety, health, vibrancy of the surrounding neighborhoods by creating more and better ways to access the road, the creek, the park system, and the other side. And as part of doing that, you're able to connect more residents to job opportunities, to economic development. You're able to find ways to reknit some of these neighborhoods back together. All right, that's enough build up. So this is our recommendation as a result of that process. And I'm not going to read every single thing that's on here. There'll be boards that are cleverly hidden for this moment, but as soon as this meeting, the presentation is over, we'll put them up. You'll be able to go up, walk up to them, ask questions. So what we're showing from west to east is an at-grade roadway that is essentially one lane in each direction. It has the ability to have turn lanes and things like that. More crossings, additional crossings. I'll show you some cross sections of what we think can be replacing where the expressway is today on the next couple of slides. We're in some cases removing interchanges. In some cases, in order to accomplish this, we've stress tested this a number of times. There are places where we're recommending additional on or off ramps because essentially what we're doing is distributing all of the activity in a different way. So there are going to be places where there's better pedestrian activity, there's better bicycle activity, there's going to be other places for cars to go. And if anybody remembers, one of the things that we looked at earlier is actually very few people ride in cars from one end to the other, right? That it's less than 20% in one direction, it's less than 10% in the other direction. Most folks that are even on the Skagit-Jacquard Expressway as it exists today are really going somewhere in the neighborhood. We're using this as a kind of local distributor. So what we're talking about, again, is an at-grade roadway with, many of those dots and the blue and purple lines are new crossings, right? So you'll have more ways to get through and across or along the corridor. You'll see on some of the other graphics where this means you're actually reclaiming a lot of space. That could be parkland, that could be development, that could be community activity, it could be any number of things. Taking some guesses kind of at what that looks like. So again, I'm not going to read it all. This will be up on the boards here, and we can come back to it as needed. We've also taken a stab at what a representative cross section of this would be, right? So you've got about 120 feet. It varies depending on where you are that the current expressway occupies. And what we're talking about here is really, again, the design goals, and then the pictures are representation of it. Maintain a center median that would be landscaped, not really active, but really highly pleasing environment. Sidewalks on both sides, a separated bike path on at least one side of the street. Some places we may want it on both. Those are for the design process to look at. Space within here for right turn lanes and left turn lanes and things like that where you may need them. Parking, sometimes depending on the land use along this road. And then when I say the main segment can float, I mean, this cross section won't always look like this. At some places, the road itself may want to be more to the north or more to the south, depending on where you are. And you can see, just to go back on this one, kind of where that main road would be. So we're talking about a cross section that floats within that. Right. And this, by the way, this is the section of the Skagit-Jacquard Parkway that is west of Parkside Avenue. Right. So, and we have a little graphic in the top right, a little locus map that sort of shows what that recommendation is. East of Parkside, which is the traditional Humboldt Parkway section, it's actually, there's even wider, there's a wider cross section there. You're in a cut for part of that. We're talking about that would be raised up. The intersections would be at grade. You'd have a center road, which would be essentially the through road there, and then calling it a carriage road along either side. That's more along the frontage of where the houses are, where those residences are, where any of the other land uses are. So that would be the more local access. And then within the middle, you'd have that through lane. You'd preserve the parking on the carriage roads. Within the center road, you would not have that. You'd have planting strips, you'd have room for bike paths. And again, all of this is a design approach. The specifics of exactly what goes on any of those strips or how that looks are all things for kind of the next process. And you may remember that because we're looking at a much larger area, because we're talking about all the things that need to happen in Region Central, each of the scenarios that we presented back in May had their own list of other supporting elements that went along with that. The things that should happen in order for an at-grade road or a full removal or a partial removal or the status quo. Here are the other things that you would do that would go along with that. So these are new connections, they're transit upgrades, there are improvements to any of the surrounding streets within Region Central. And these are some of the things that were considered. We also evaluated each of those and chose the supporting elements that best accomplish those goals within the hybrid recommendation that we're showing here today. I know I'm throwing a lot of information at folks, but very much tried to make sure that each of these scenarios or the supporting elements that were chosen looked at an associated also improvement of, almost 14 miles of other Region Central roads, and building them for the future while protecting residential neighborhoods and building the kinds of things that are going to help folks get around Region Central and beyond. And we will also have boards that show what these are. There's some really critical elements here that we're showing on this slide about key supporting elements. So I won't read all the words, but you're talking about new ramps that replace the ramps that exist. So you get off and still are able to access Region Central just slightly differently. Again, distributes that a little bit more. Enhanced vehicle accommodations on certain streets. Again, we've stress tested this and tried to look at where else our accommodations need to be made. And the kinds of things we're talking about there are improved traffic signals, coordinated lights. Maybe we have to look at some turn lanes or other things that make those roads more efficient because there's going to be changes in the patterns of how folks work. And then where we might need some additional protection, local road mitigations. And I think on this slide, we're also showing some of those additional crossings. And you see there's many more than there are today of the Scajaquada Expressway. And again, all of those would be at grade. So if you can picture any of those signals, any of those intersections, you'll have a light, you'll have a walk sign, you'll be able to get across pretty easily. You're not crossing a highway, you're crossing 2 lanes with a median in between. That's a much more pleasant environment than anything that you have today. And then this is the full list of the supporting elements that are part of this recommended scenario here. And again, you see, improved bike corridors, multimodal corridors, which are more designing those streets as complete streets. So we might add bike facilities, we might add transit, we might add sidewalks, a little bit of everything, just a much more balanced approach to each of them. And then the places where we're talking about enhanced vehicle accommodations. So there's much detail here. Again, these are all going to be online. They'll be on boards here for folks to take a look at. And because we know there's so much information and many of you are going to want to zero in on where you live or where you go to school or anything else within the individual neighborhoods, we did a few blow-ups of each of these areas. Maybe blow-ups, not the right words. Some key maps that show the areas in much more detail. And I'm not asking anybody to read these on the slide. That's why they will be on boards. But we also tried to point out on each of these, and there's 4 of them. So this is the area by Buff State. Try to show the actual benefits of this scenario, not just as a whole, but in individual locations for mobility, for parks, heritage, and natural resources, and for inclusive development benefits and equity. Because this is what we mean, right? This is the kind of work that we've done with your help throughout this process to say, when this scored highly for this reason in this place, that's why. That's what we meant by it. That's what you meant by it. That's our interpretation of it. So again, not asking anybody to read the words here, but to go to the boards on the side, to spend some time online after this, even after you think about it, and you want to look at things in a little bit more detail and talk about the individual components for each of these. So again, this is the Buff State portion. Again, you can see some of the additional connections there. There's a new road where that E is, right? That would be a new connection across to Tonawanda. That's a really isolated area that is kind of derelict right now and creates a huge opportunity for almost anything that the city or the region wants to see there. Connects that to Buff State. And you can see when you get into this at a granular level, how those additional connections take place and what they might mean for all the sorts of things that we're trying to achieve here. Similarly for the Hoyt Lake portion, and show, there's a lot of thought that goes into where the road would go and how that would align. Again, a new connection just for pedestrians at the end of Nottingham Terrace there. Improvements to some of those connections directly abutting. So it's not just we're fixing the corridor, but thinking about how do you connect from the neighborhood to the corridor. are big parts of what we're showing here. Again, by Delaware Park. Again, including a new bike ped connection in the south there. And some of the other improvements here, you can see the ramp removals. And again, I encourage you all to come ask us questions and look at the boards and spend some time looking at the individual components. And then the last section by Humboldt Parkway, and you can see the removal of the ramp connection from the Kensington to Humboldt Parkway and to the Skagakwood Expressway. That would all be replaced at grade, at Delavan. And you see a new westbound ramp where that D is. So if you're coming south, kind of from the airport, a way that you would connect over into the corridor. So we've done our best to translate all of the things that you were looking for, all the various components of our analysis into this recommendation. So please come up to us, ask questions, think about it. Because there's a lot of thought that's gone into each and every single thing that you see on each of these maps. David, I promised that we would hear from you again, and I think this is the time where I think we just have a couple of more slides and then we'll be released to come talk to the boards and meet any of us with these name tags and ask us really specific questions. David, I'm trying to stall till you get up here. But thank you all. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for your continued participation.
All right, so this is going to be very brief. And in effect, I stole my own thunder because this is just to remind us that we are looking at transportation through to use the phrase that Ralph used, lenses. I was on a conference recently and we were talking about data, and someone said the data doesn't matter. It's the perspectives you bring to analyzing and using that data that are what matter. And that's what this has been all about. They had information then, we have it now, we look at it differently. And basically it's through the eyes of that child's parents, let's say, as opposed to who's ever driving those cars. On that note, you're not really hearing from me, you're hearing from Hal. This process, Hal was kind enough to hire us as consultants and our great sub-consultant colleagues. But this process now belongs to him and to you. And so bond together and go forth and do great things. Thank you.
All right, last slide. Let me go quickly here. So since this is a non-traditional transportation process, everybody asks me how are we actually going to.
Oh.
Hey,
Maybe just gotta put it.
So how are we going to get this done after this process? And a couple bullets. Where does this process go next? Everybody asks, what are we going to do? So if we have a non-traditional transportation planning process, we're probably going to have a somewhat non-traditional implementation process also. So the first thing, where do we go next? Public engagement regarding recommendations. You thought you were done. This is the last public meeting where we kind of go over these, but we will need to stay together as we go through the process. Work on continuous ideas. How does it get implemented? Work through the design process also. And I think we'll get a better result from everybody participating that can. The second, assemble the full report and documentation. The consultants are almost done. We have a few more steps to go after tonight's event because we've put in our ideas and consent and worked for over 18 months now. Things need to get finished like a cost estimate because we don't know exactly yet. We have some finance already available and we need to probably get some more based on what we're seeing here. Also then reconcile to the environmental review process. So traditionally you look at a small segment and you do your environmental review process, but in this we have not only one small segment, but a variety of projects by different actors. So there was some environmental review started before. So we're looking at, can we get onto that and continue it or start from scratch? These are things we need to know to move the project forward. Detailed traffic analysis. People are very curious about diversions, traffic, things like that. Obviously, as Ralph discussed, we have looked at this at the aggregate level. So we know that basically, this can work. But as we get into, but we don't have enough detailed design to simulate traffic, which can happen. So we need to look at some more detail in terms of design and then have a traffic analysis performed to demonstrate how this works and recommended improvements to assure there's good mobility. Stakeholder and public consensus on mitigation measures. So again, we'll be out to you, showing you how it works, what we can do, and how to move it forward. Project owners and resource needs. So in a project, a lot of times you'll come to a project end and it's one owner, one piece of road. But since we expanded this to Region Central, there'll be a variety, a market basket, really, if you will, of solutions that can include the 198 itself, parallel arterials, types of transit, other projects are going to be in that. So we need to build out who would own each of those parts of the answer and build an action matrix, then to go down with the key stakeholders and get everybody working together. We've done this before. It's not impossible. We can work together in Buffalo. So to implement all the initiatives, put in a sequence, get the funding lined up, and just start working through it. And then establish a continuing mechanism to ensure timely completion of the project. So once we get it going, we need to stay on it. You probably have to sequence it to a certain extent, but then make sure you got the right money at the right time to keep this project moving towards completion. So we've got a strategy. We've done a lot of technical work. We've got to move forward. And I think this is a great opportunity as we're wrapping up this part of the project to move on to the next and get it into the process. So with that, I'm going to have Nancy explain to you how we're going to do the comment portion and move forward with it. Thank you so much again for coming out.
Again, thank you for coming. That does conclude the formal part of our presentation tonight, both in this room and online. If you're online and you check the chat, you will see that there is a website in the chat, and I will put it up on the screen here for all of you folks in the room so that when you're at home, you can go back and look at the website, see all of these slides and details at your leisure, and submit comments online. So that concludes the webinar. Thank you very much for joining. For those of you in the room, if you've heard enough and you've got the picture, you want to go home and take a look at it online, you can feel free to grab a cookie and go home for dinner, or feel free to stay around and look at these boards. And what we have in the rear of the room are two boards that show the overall scenario for the entire length of the corridor. And then up here, we have the community benefits for each segment of the corridor, starting in the west and going to the east. So feel free to gather around. There's folks from GBNRTC, folks from the consultant team here to answer your questions. And again, please, if you have any comments, fill out that card that you were given and put it into the box back there on the sign-in table. Thanks so much.